Montana Territory, June 1883. The sky was too blue for a day like this. Dust kicked up in the churchyard as Delaney Mae Morton stood silent in a borrowed cream dress, the hem stained from the ride into town. Her hands trembled around the single wildflower bouquet she had picked herself that morning. Folks whispered from behind the whitewashed chapel walls, and the preacher cleared his throat for the third time, glancing toward the door. He was not coming. The man she had crossed 3 states to marry, Jedediah Carter, a rancher she had written to for nearly a year, was gone. He had sent a boy to say he would not be marrying a woman with nothing to her name. That was all. No apology. Not even the decency to tell her himself. Delaney kept her chin up. She would not cry here. Not in front of strangers. She stepped away, the bouquet falling from her hands into the dust. No one stopped her. She passed by a group of women, their expressions half pity, half scorn. One muttered something about poor girls thinking they can marry up. Delaney heard it, but she did not stop. She walked past the general store, past the telegraph office, past the saloon with men laughing too loud for a day like this. Her valise was still at the boarding house, but she could not go back there. Not yet. Not with all of them watching. She kept walking until her feet led her to the edge of town, where the grass grew high and the trees stood quiet. She sat under a cottonwood, hands folded in her lap, and stared at nothing. She had not eaten since yesterday. She had nowhere to go. "Madam?" The voice was low, careful. Delaney turned her head. A man stood 20 paces away, one hand holding his hat, the other resting on the reins of a chestnut horse. He was tall, with rough clothes and sun-browned skin. His hair was dark, curled where it met his collar, and his eyes, those were the color of the river in spring, soft and clear but steady. "My name's Callum Briggs," he said. "I saw what happened back at the church." Delaney looked away. "I do not wish to talk about it." "I understand," he said gently. I thought maybe you could use a ride somewhere, or something to eat." She did not answer. He nodded. "All right. I will leave you be then." He turned to go, and she surprised herself. "Wait." He turned back. She stood slowly. "I do not have anywhere to go." He walked closer, still holding his hat in both hands like he was afraid to spook a bird. "You got folks?" "No," she said. "Only a brother, and he is in Wyoming working the mines. I have not heard from him in months." "You came all this way alone?" he asked. She nodded. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a moment. "Then, you hungry?" "Yes." He helped her onto the horse without asking too many questions. His saddle was worn, his hands calloused. He rode beside her, leading the horse down a narrow trail behind town. They did not speak. She did not know why she trusted him, only that his silence did not feel like judgment. He led her to a small ranch nestled against the hills. It was not much, just a cabin, a barn, and a fenced pasture, but it was clean and quiet, with chickens milling about the yard and smoke drifting from the chimney. He helped her down. "You can rest here tonight. I will make some stew." Inside, the cabin smelled like pine and tobacco and something baking. He showed her to a chair by the fire and handed her a warm mug of coffee. She sipped slowly. "Why are you being kind to me?" He stirred the pot on the stove. "Because someone ought to be." They ate in silence. The stew was good, thick with potatoes and carrots and a little bit of beef. When she finished, he gave her a wool blanket and set up a cot near the fire. "You will be safe here," he said, then tipped his hat and stepped outside. Delaney sat for a long time, staring at the flames. She had lost everything, but for the first time that day her hands were not shaking. She was still wrapped in the blanket when the door opened again. Callum stepped inside, brushing the dust from his coat. "I should tell you something," he said. "I had a mail-order bride once. 2 years ago. She died on the way here. Fever got her before the train reached Billings." Delaney's heart ached. "I am sorry." He nodded. "I just wanted you to know I understand. What it is like to wait for someone. To hope." She met his eyes. "He said I was too poor." that he expected a woman with. More. You are not the one who should be ashamed, Callum said. Her throat tightened. He bent to stoke the fire, his face cast in warm light. If you want to stay here until you figure things out, you can. There is plenty of work and I could use the help. She looked around the cabin. It was not grand, but it was honest. And warm. I do not want to be a burden. You would not be. She hesitated. Then, all right. The next morning, Delaney rose before the sun. She lit the stove and made coffee, then went outside to feed the chickens. She found Callum in the barn, brushing his horse. You do not need to do chores, he said when he saw her. I want to, she said. I am not made to sit idle. He nodded once and handed her a pail. Days passed, then a week. She learned the rhythm of the place, mornings in the garden, afternoons tending the stock. Callum worked beside her, quiet but kind. He showed her how to mend fence, how to ride bareback, how to shoot straight. She laughed more than she had in months. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn gold, Callum said, I know what they said in town. About you. She stared out across the pasture. It does not matter anymore. It does to me, he said. She looked at him. I have been thinking, he said. You came here to be someone's wife. You still can be. Her breath caught. I am not offering out of pity, he added. I am offering because I see you. And I trust you. And I think I could care for you. Delaney's fingers tightened around her mug. You do not even know me. I know enough. She looked into his eyes. He was not bluffing. He was not trying to be noble. He meant it. I do not have a dowry, she said softly. I do not have anything. You have everything I want, he replied. Her heart cracked open. She whispered, all right. And just like that, she was no longer alone. Rain arrived with the third week of June, slow and steady, soaking into the thirsty earth and softening the sound of hooves and boots alike. Delaney stood at the edge of the barn doorway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching the pasture blur into grays and greens. The air smelled of wet sage and wood smoke. She didn't turn when Callum spoke behind her. There's a heifer calving early. I'll need another set of hands. She reached for her shawl. Where? He nodded toward the north fence line. By the cottonwoods near the creek bend. I've got the lantern ready. They walked side by side, the storm muting their steps. Delaney didn't ask how he knew she'd want to help. He had learned, without pressing, what she could carry. The lantern cast a warm oval ahead of them, flickering against the wet grass. At the creek bend, the heifer laid on her side, flanks heaving. Callum knelt without hesitation, pressing his palm gently to her belly. She's struggling, he said. We'll have to pull. Delaney crouched beside him, her skirts damp at the knees. Tell me what to do. His instructions were brief, steady. She followed each one, holding firm when he needed leverage, wiping sweat from the cow's brow with her hem when the animal shuddered. The first cry of the calf broke through the rain like a bell. Delaney exhaled sharply, her fingers trembling from exertion. She's a strong one, Callum said, brushing mud from the calf's back. Delaney reached out and touched the newborn's wet coat. So small, she whispered. Not for long, he said. These hills raised them tough. They stayed until the cow nosed her calf upright, then walked back in silence, clothes soaked through but spirits settled. Inside the cabin, Delaney peeled off her shawl and hung it near the stove. Callum handed her a dry towel without a word. She looked at him, then really looked. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and there was mud along the hem of his shirt, but his eyes were clear and untroubled. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked, voice low. He sat at the edge of the hearth. Used to, when I was younger. Thought maybe I'd head down to Fort Benton, try my hand at freight or carpentry. But something always kept me here. She wrung her hands in the towel. What was it? He studied the fire before answering. My father's grave. The land. A promise I made to my mother before she passed. Delaney sat across from him. You were close to her? He nodded. She taught me how to read. Taught me to patch boots and boil down bones for broth. She used to say if a man's going to survive out here, he ought to know how to feed something besides himself. Delaney smiled faintly. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you, he said, eyes lifting to meet hers. They stayed like that, quiet, fire between them, rain soft against the roof. Later, after the storm cleared, Delaney found herself in the garden, pulling weeds from between rows of young corn. Callum stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. I got word from town, he said. Sheriff passed through yesterday. Said there's a woman asking after you. Delaney froze. What did she look like? He came closer, voice even. Red hair. Wore a brooch with blue glass in it. Said she was your kin. I told the sheriff you were safe here, and he left it at that. Delaney straightened slowly. That's my cousin, Ruth. I haven't seen her in 4 years. You want me to ride in and bring her out? She shook her head. No, not yet. She's not the kind to leave a place without wanting something. Callum's brow furrowed, but he didn't press. That night, Delaney stayed up past dark, mending a tear in one of Callum's shirts beside the oil lamp. He sat at the table, carving a new handle for his old skinning knife. After a while, he said, when I first came to this land, I didn't speak for near 2 months. Not until I learned what the wind sounded like between these hills. She didn't look up. I didn't speak for the first week after my mother died. Not even when the doctor came. He set down the knife. I think quiet people carry more. Delaney tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. Maybe. Or maybe they're just waiting to be heard. He stood. Come outside with me. She followed him to the porch. The stars were out sharp and clean in the sky. Somewhere beyond the trees, a night bird called. I've been thinking, he said, about building another room off the back of the cabin. She glanced toward the back wall. For what? For you, he said. If you want it. Delaney looked out across the pasture. The calf they'd helped deliver earlier was nestled in the grass, its mother standing guard. I don't need my own room, she said. He didn't respond. She turned to face him. I need a place I belong. And I think I've found it. Callum watched her for a long moment, something soft settling in his expression. Then we'll build it together, he said. The first seedling frost touched down in late September, crisping the outer leaves of the squash plants and turning the air brittle before sunrise. Delaney pulled the heavy quilt tighter across her shoulders as she stepped out onto the porch, a cup of chicory coffee warming her palms. The pasture looked silvered, the horses stirring slow in the chill. She watched Callum cross the yard with the rhythm of a man who'd walked the same ground every day of his life. A feed sack slung over one shoulder and a new tear in one sleeve. You've got a hole, she said, nodding at his shirt. Mended it twice already, he replied, setting down the sack. Think it's trying to tell me something. She smiled into her cup. Maybe it wants a rest. I could say the same for my hands. He leaned against the post beside her, the porch boards creaking under his boots. They stood together without hurry, the quiet between them no longer filled with things unspoken, but things understood. I've been thinking about Ruth, she said after a long moment. I reckon she's not one to give up easy. You want me to speak to her if she shows again? No, Delaney said. I'll do it myself. She always respected directness more than distance. Callum gave a slow nod. Then I'll be nearby. She glanced at him. You always are. He shrugged once, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. That afternoon, she walked the line of the north fence, checking for breaks. The wind had picked up, rattling dry leaves against the posts. She paused to rest beneath a narrow stand of aspen, the gold leaves flickering like coins in the sun. Her fingers brushed the small pouch she'd sewn into her skirt lining inside it, a folded letter she hadn't opened yet. It had arrived a week ago, addressed in a hand she didn't recognize, postmarked from Cheyenne. She hadn't told Callum about it. By the time she returned to the house, the sun had dipped low and Callum was hauling the last of the firewood into the lean-to. She started toward the cabin, then turned back. Callum. He paused, shifting the bundle in his arms. I got a letter. He waited. It might be from my brother, she said. I haven't opened it. I'm not sure why. Would you like me to read it with you? She looked down. Yes. They sat at the table, the letter between them. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The paper inside was worn, the ink faded. She read it aloud in a quiet voice. It wasn't from her brother. It was from a man who'd worked alongside him in the mines. He didn't know much, only that there'd been a collapse weeks ago and her brother's name hadn't been on the list of survivors. Delaney folded the letter once more. Her shoulders didn't shake and her voice didn't crack, but her fingers curled tight around the paper. I thought maybe he'd just lost touch, she said. That he'd write eventually. Callum reached across the table, not to take the paper, but just to rest his hand over hers. You don't have to carry it alone, he said. I don't know how not to. I'll show you. She didn't speak again until the fire burned low. When she finally stood, she didn't let go of his hand. The next morning, she walked into town with him for the first time since the churchyard. She wore a clean dress and a shawl he'd given her, the blue one stitched with pine cones. They stopped at the hardware store for salt, then at the livery to check on a new harness strap. Outside the mercantile, Ruth was waiting. Her cousin looked older than Delaney remembered, her hair drawn back too tight and her gloves buttoned high despite the heat. She didn't smile. I suppose I should be surprised, Ruth said, glancing between them. But I'm not. Delaney stepped forward, calm. You came a long way. I had questions. No one back home heard from you. I had no reason to send word. Ruth's gaze flicked to Callum. And this is the reason? Callum stood still, saying nothing. Delaney didn't waver. This is my husband. Ruth's mouth pressed into a thin line. You always were stubborn. I learned from the best. They stood there, the silence brittle. I don't need anything from you, Delaney said. But I won't hide either. Ruth looked at her for a long time. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. This was your mother's, Ruth said. I've kept it long enough. Delaney took it without a word. Ruth nodded once, then turned and walked away. Callum didn't speak until they were halfway home. You all right? Delaney held the parcel close. Yes, I think so. Later, she unwrapped it on the porch. Inside was a brooch carved from bone, a wildflower pressed beneath its glass. She ran her thumb across it, the edges worn smooth. Callum sat beside her, watching the horizon. There's a lot I don't know about the future, she said. But I know this feels like the start of something I can trust. He turned his head. You don't have to say it. I want to. She reached for his hand. I love you, Callum Briggs. He didn't answer with words. He leaned in and kissed her, quiet and certain, his hand warm against her cheek. And when she leaned into him, there was no hesitation. Only peace. The first snow came early, lacing the edges of the window panes with frost and softening the sound of boots on the porch. Delaney stood at the table, sorting through a bundle of dried herbs Callum had traded for up near the Flathead River. Her fingertips brushed the lavender stalks with care, separating them from the sage and yarrow. Callum entered without a word, brushing snow from his shoulders. He hung his coat by the door, then crossed to the stove, lifting the kettle without needing to ask if she wanted the water hot. The quiet between them had grown rich, filled not with avoidance, but the comfort of knowing what the other needed before it was spoken. I saw a wagon stuck in the muck near the ridge road, he said. 2 mules down and a boy trying to dig them out with half a shovel. Delaney finished tying a bundle of time. You help him. Couldn't leave him there. His name's Eli. 17 maybe. Says he's headed toward the Bitterroot Valley, looking for kin. I offered him a place in the barn overnight. She glanced toward the window. He's not running from something, is he? Didn't ask. But he's got a scar on the side of his jaw and he flinches when you move too quick. Delaney reached for a cloth to wrap the herbs. I'll take him some supper. She ladled out a bowl of beans and salt pork, wrapped a wedge of cornbread in a napkin, and stepped out into the blue dusk. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed the yard, the scent of pine heavy on the air. The barn was warmer than she expected. Eli sat against a bale of hay, his shoulders hunched beneath a patched wool coat. He looked up when she entered, eyes wary. I brought you something, she said. It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly. He took the bowl with stiff hands. Thank you, ma'am. You can call me Delaney. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. She didn't press. There's hot water and soap in the wash basin near the door. Tomorrow you can come inside if you'd like. The stove's better than this. Eli looked down at the cornbread. I'm not used to folks being decent. Delaney folded her arms, the cold pressing through her sleeves. Neither was I. But people can surprise you. He nodded once, then turned back to his food. She left him to it. Inside, Callum was bent over the ledger, working through figures by lamplight. She sat across from him, drying her hands on a cloth. He's thin as a rail, she said, but polite. He's carrying something, Callum said without looking up. You can see it in the way he stands. Delaney touched the edge of the table. Not everyone carries their burden the same way. Callum met her eyes. I know. The next morning, Eli stood by the porch with his hat in his hands, watching the sun rise over the tree line. Delaney handed him a tin mug of coffee, and he startled slightly before taking it. Callum emerged from the barn, wiping his hands. I'll need help hauling the last of the feed into the loft. You game? Eli hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Delaney watched them cross the yard, both quiet, both wary in their own way. She turned back inside and began kneading bread, the dough sticking to her fingers. The scent of yeast and ash filled the cabin as the stove warmed the kitchen. By dusk, the loft was stocked and the wind had picked up. Eli stayed near the hearth, drying his boots. Delaney stirred a pot of rabbit stew while Callum carved a new handle for the garden spade. After supper, Eli lingered. I worked a freight line back east, he said at last. We hauled coal mostly. My father died in the spring and my stepmother sold the mule under me. I figured I'd head west. Delaney looked at him. You have anyone waiting? No, ma'am. She nodded. Then you're not the only one who came west alone. He looked at her and something in his posture eased. That night, when the fire had burned down low and the cabin was quiet, Callum reached for her hand beneath the quilt. I've been thinking, he said. Delaney turned her head toward him. About the land south of the Red Creek. It's good soil and it's ours now. We could build a second house there, maybe take on a few more hands come spring. Folks like Eli. People looking to start over. She traced the line of his knuckles with her thumb. You think we're ready for that? I think we've got more than enough to share. Delaney didn't answer right away. She listened to the wind brushing against the shutters, the steady breath of the man beside her. Yes, she said. I think we do. And as the snow deepened outside, they lay quiet in the warmth of what they'd built, a life not taken, but chosen. One rooted not in fortune or chance, but in the small, steady acts of care that had become their everyday. By midwinter, the cabin stood firm against the winds that came down from the high ridges. It seems tight with clay and moss, every log settled like the bones of something meant to last. The mornings came slow and pale, the sun low in the sky, but inside, life moved steady. Callum had taken to repairing harnesses by the fire, while Delaney worked on a quilt of salvaged muslin and old flannel shirts. The quiet was companionable, broken only by the occasional crackle of wood or the soft murmur of Eli reading aloud from the one book he'd brought west, a worn volume of Whitman, its pages bent from use. One evening, as the light faded to a soft bruise at the edges of the windows, Callum laid aside the leather strap he'd been stitching. You ever think about what you'd have done if you never came west? Delaney didn't look up from her needle. I used to. In the weeks after I arrived, I thought of little else. I imagined myself a teacher in some town where the trees grow close together, or maybe running a small shop selling ribbons and buttons. You'd have been good at either. She drew the thread through with care. Maybe, but I wouldn't have learned to plant rows by the moon or how to help a cow deliver in the dark. I wouldn't know the sound of your boots in the snow. I wouldn't know this. Callum reached across and brushed a bit of thread from her sleeve. I hope you never feel like you settled. I didn't, she said. I chose. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the smell of pine sap and distant smoke. Eli rose from his stool and stretched, then slipped into the barn without a word. He'd grown quieter, but not withdrawn. Each day he'd taken on more mucking stalls, splitting wood, checking traps near the tree line. He spoke little of where he came from, but he'd begun to whistle as he worked, low and tuneless, like a man remembering how to be at ease. Delaney set the quilt aside. He's ready for his own place. Callum nodded, resting his elbows on his knees. I've been thinking the same. That land south of the creek, it's not much, but it's his if he wants it. He will, she said. But he won't ask. I'll offer. A week later, after the thaw loosened the streambeds and the horses could be saddled without risk of ice underfoot, they rode out with Eli in tow. The land Callum had spoken of rolled soft and wide, with a line of cottonwoods marking the edge. A shallow spring bubbled up near the center, and rabbits darted through the brush. Eli dismounted and stood still for a long time, his shoulders lifted like he was holding his breath. Callum said, "It's yours if you want it. I'll help you build." Eli turned slowly. "I can't pay you. We're not asking you to. I don't know how to build a house. You'll learn." Eli pressed a hand to his jaw where the scar tugged slightly when he frowned. "I've never had anything that was mine." Delaney stepped closer. "You do now." They began that spring. Callum cut timber while Eli dug post holes and learned the rhythm of a saw. Delaney brought food at midday and taught him to boil soap from ash and tallow. The work was slow but honest. On the first day the roof was finished, Eli sat on the porch beam, legs dangling, and said, "I want to call it Still Bend." Delaney smiled. "That sounds like a place that could keep someone." "I think that's what it is." As the land warmed, so did the life between her and Callum. There were no grand declarations, only the soft assurance of days shared and tasks divided. When he brushed her back hair while she washed, or laid his palm against her waist in passing, it was not for show, it was a habit, like breathing. One morning, Delaney woke early with a hand pressed to her belly. She stayed still, listening to the hush of pre-dawn, and smiled to herself. She waited a week before telling Callum. She found him near the shed, repairing a wagon wheel. "I think we'll need a cradle by winter." He straightened slowly. "You're sure?" Delaney nodded once. "Very." He stepped toward her and laid his hand gently over hers. "You've just made me the richest man west of the Missouri." That summer, they built a small addition off the cabin, not for privacy, but to make space for what was coming. Callum carved a rocking chair in the evenings, and Delaney planted marigolds along the path. Eli stopped by often, always with something to trade or offer snares he'd made. Dried berries, a new canteen. On the first frost of October, Delaney gave birth to a daughter with dark hair and a steady gaze. Callum held her with the reverence of a man who knew what it meant to lose and still choose love. They named her Margaret, and, after Delaney's mother and Callum's grandmother. She was a quiet baby, watchful and strong, and Callum sang to her in the evenings low songs without words meant only for her. Eli built her a cradle from pine and brought it wrapped in an old quilt. "She'll outgrow it before you know it," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "We'll pass it along when someone else needs it," Delaney said. The seasons turned again. Snow came, and with it more days spent indoors, more hours beside the fire. The cabin was full now of warmth, of quiet laughter, of something earned and held. One evening, as the sky turned the color of coals and the baby slept between them, Delaney leaned against Callum's shoulder. "I used to think peace was something quiet," she said. "Something still." Callum kissed her temple. "It's this." And it was. A life built with care. A home that held. A love that did not need to be spoken to be known. They had come through the hardest parts. And now they had everything.